welcome back to Frontend Hire. I've released new content called FeatureFlags, and this would be part of the refactoring series. In this, we would essentially be building two flags, development flag and feature flag. And let us just even try to understand what a feature flag is. At its core, it's nothing but a simple condition that decides whether something is active or not. For example, you have a new button you want to experiment, you put it behind a flag, and if that flag evaluates to be true, we show the new button. Otherwise, we still show the old button, right? And we can extend this fundamental to more complex scenarios such as A/B testing and phased rollouts. But apart from that, there's nothing special about it. This is a very good thing to know that you can do something like this. And it helps in code bases which are essentially old, right? The legacy ones. And yeah, in this series, I plan to show you that. I also have set up a quick dummy repo and you can clone it and we'll get there soon. It uses PNPM, so make sure you have that installed. But otherwise, this project would essentially use an older version of Material UI. It's version 5, the new one is version 7, I believe. And by the end, the plan is to deprecate version 5 MUI in favor of a completely new UI library called maintain. Again, the choice of maintain here is just an example. We can replace any library like this. Now, if you quickly note, I have a callout here too. I said that we'll deprecate MUI and not replace. And the difference is deprecation means there is a high possibility that you still have two UI libraries in your code base. This is because you cannot overnight migrate to the new one. It's tough. And you also don't want to delay pushing new features. So you're at a place where, okay, let's just use new UI library to build new features and we'll slowly migrate the old ones, right? And that is what deprecation is. So here, that's what we're going to do. We are going to deprecate MUI5 in favor of maintain. Now, again, you might have a question that, okay, why do we even replace or even deprecate MUI? Why don't we just upgrade MUI to version 6 or version 7? From my experience, I've dealt with many code bases that use MUI. And the problem is most of the times developers digress from the documentation and they don't do it the way the docs suggest you to do, and it's essentially out of control. So when it comes to migrating to a newer version, it's going to be a pain. And even if you try to migrate, these kind of updates will cause regressions across the app because it's the same UI library across the app. But now let's say you plan to use completely new UI library. The changes are very much constrained to where you use it, and you don't have to worry about, those regressions. Also, MUI design is a very Google-like design, and many times what designers come up with doesn't fit MUI's philosophy. So instead of trying to make MUI work like that, it's better we just bring in a different UI library that's more closely aligned to the design philosophy the team brings in. And also, before you decide on such a migration, obviously you have to talk it with your team, clients, the customers or whatever, and then proceed. But let me tell you, these kind of decisions like choosing a completely different UI or a routing library are quite common at startups. And this is essentially because during early growth, they prioritize shipping features over polishing the underlying architecture or design. Great. Now let us just clone the starter project and get started. All right, I have cloned the repo here, and make sure you're on the branch 0 in it. That is the starter branch. This project uses PNPM, so make sure you have that and install the dependencies using PNPM. All right, you can run the dev server with PNPM dev. This project uses Vite. The dev server would be at localhost 5173. So let's quickly see what the project looks like. It's a React Vite project, and it also uses React Router for the routing system. Let me zoom it out. And we essentially have 4 routes here. 2 of the routes share the app layout and 2 of the routes share the auth layout. This is nothing but this is the homepage which you're seeing, which is the app layout and the homepage. And we also have the about page. And we also have login and register pages. So that is it. And like I said, this project uses MUI version 5. So now let us start building our flags. All right, the first flag which we are going to build is called DevelopmentFlag. And what they help you do is hide unfinished work. And let me run you through this scenario. Let's assume you start using a new library for a new feature and set up a lot of config files for it. And you're also working on a new feature. But now the team wants you to stop doing whatever you're doing and start using this library immediately for another feature. Now the problem is you have set up a lot of config in this branch. There's too many commits there. And what do? Your options are to create a new branch and redo the entire config step again, or you could hide the unfinished work for now behind a development flag. And of course, raise a PR, and the team could also use this unfinished work as some kind of reference. But yeah, again, this is not a flag you want to use often. It's very rarely used. Even I have not used this more than 10 times, I would say, so far. And yeah, I also don't recommend using this because the problem is when it comes to code reviews, do you review the unfinished work or not? It's essentially just adding comments to your code, but not adding comments. There are some use cases where it can really benefit you, but yeah, but it's a very good starting point for you to understand how to use a flag. Like I said, we're going to use maintain, so I'm going to quickly set that up. I'm just going to quickly use my notes to do that. So maintain has two libraries which you need to install, which is the maintain core, which is the actual components, and it also needs some maintain hooks. Hooks are not used for every component, but it's a good idea to install them. And maintain uses something called post CSS to style stuff. Luckily, MUI doesn't conflict with that, so we can safely use post CSS here. And we would also need to create a post CSS config file. Post css.config. It's a common JS module. And yeah, just copy paste this stuff. You don't have to worry about how this thing or how maintain works. I just want to demo flags to you. And maintain also comes with a provider which you need to wrap your entire app in. You also do that for MUI, I believe, but yeah, let's just do it here. All right, so this maintain provider, hopefully, yep, we have it. Now let us refresh our dev server. And I think I'm also, okay, yeah, this is a very good point for me to talk about. I have set up the maintain provider, but I have still not imported style. So if you try to use any of the maintain components, things won't look like they look on the top. One more thing which we need to add is the maintain styles. And these styles are nothing but they normalize some of this stuff and add some code styling for the base components. MUI also does that, and in fact, the moment I press save, you will notice our app change. So I'm gonna just do that here. Did you notice? The border was gone and things look a little better now. Let me undo this change. You see that? So, and let me tell you, whenever you are doing such a migration where you are going to work with two libraries for a while, remember things will look weird at times, things will break at times. There are ways to handle this. Essentially, what you have to do is don't add the reset styles of your newer library. Wait till the new library takes over most of the app and then introduce the new library's reset styles. But yeah, it is out of scope for this course, but I figured, yeah, I should mention that. Cool. Now we have the necessary setup to use maintain. So right away, let's go try to refresh the design of old feature 1. So which is located in my feature 1 component. So this is how my feature 1 looks. So it uses paper, typography, pretty much everything from MUI. The plan is to use the paper library which comes from maintain. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to duplicate this part of the code again. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a reference. This is a reference. And things will break because I'm not writing a single component here. So I'm just going to wrap that in a fragment. And what people like to do is they actually comment code and do it. The problem with that is you don't see the visual difference, and I prefer to do it this way when I'm migrating something that's UI component related. But either way, let's start using maintain here. The fastest way I want to try maintain out here is I'm going to update the paper component to use maintain's paper. Now the problem is MUI already has paper and maintain also has a paper. So I'm going to simply alias this MUI paper to MUI paper. And the trick here is there's a VS Code shortcut which you can use instead of typing it manually. Click on paper and then use its function F2, and this would enable you to rename it in a single go. So I'm going to call paper as MUI paper. So you see it adds the MUI paper, but it also updates all the code here. So this is done. Now what I can do is I can now replace this MUI paper with maintain's paper. So I'm just going to type paper and I'm going to get VS Code suggestion, which is going to be my maintain paper. Now it doesn't share the same API as MUI, so I can quickly add some shadow, add some border, and maybe some padding. Right. So let me also replace this part. Now if you save, you can see the difference here immediately. We now have two components. Now you can comment this or do whatever. But yeah, we have successfully used a different UI library for one part of our component, the paper component, the wrapper. Now it looks like maintain is working. We don't see any weird conflicts. Of course, there's a margin conflict here. That is because I didn't add any margin. But now you decide to work on the typography and rest. This is where the team has come up all of a sudden and is now asking you to stop doing whatever you're doing, build out the feature 3 using the new UI. So now you still have a pending work here. You have done a lot of library setup configuration. And now imagine you had a lot more configuration than whatever we ran with post CSS and all that. Now you have a problem, and two solutions are, one is to comment this code and continue working on something else. But this is where I want to show you how we can use a development flag, and it's going to look something like this. So let me create a simple hook. I'm going to call it useDevelopmentFlag. And what it would do is it would return my process.env.node environment is equal to development. So if my node environment is development, that means it's dev. And I'm just gonna completely contain this new paper in this is dev and only show in development. You would still see it in your runtime server, but it's essentially hidden in production server. And I can quickly show you that by building out my app and previewing it. And when you preview, the Vite server would be at 4173. Yeah, you can see that the old the feature you were working on is not there anymore. So yeah, let me go back to my dev. The port would be 5173. So this is essentially what a development flag is, a simple condition that enables a feature. There are solutions where you don't have to depend on something like this. You could maybe cherry pick your commits of only the configuration and do it. But yeah, I'm just saying, letting you know that there is a scenario where you can do something like this. Now let me also clean it up, and instead of using it in a hook style, I'm just going to create another wrapper component, call it development flag, and it would simply take children. And what you do is you simply call the same flag, and if it is dev, return children. Otherwise, yeah, do not return anything. And we can now instead just use our development flag here. Okay, we don't need the hook anymore. Yeah, this is essentially the same. We just clean it up into two different components. And again, you can also separate them out into a different folder. You can call it use development flag.ts. Let me put this code there. I'll also create another for the component version of it. Export default, and this would also be an export default. Import my hook here. Again, you can go through the notes quickly if you're confused on what I'm doing here, and I can import here. Now again, why did I even separate it into hook and a flag? It's because sometimes you want to do things in a programmatic way. So that is where the use development flag would come in hand. If you're hiding something on the UI, you can simply use the development flag. All right, so these were very basic flags. And in the next section, I want to show you the core flag, which is a feature flag, and which is going to be a lot more useful than development flags. So I think I've covered everything. Yeah, like I said, there are ways to preserve that work of configuration using something like cherry picking your commits, but not everyone is comfortable with something like this. But yeah. All right, we saw how the development flag looks. We're going to have something very similar for the feature flags. The API is going to look similar. But let's quickly try to understand what feature flags are, right? They help you release features, and this could be something you want to test it out internally first, maybe within your team, through search patterns, through org ID, user ID, whatever, or maybe even release specific features for clients or users. Again, you can check if it's one particular user or if it's one particular client using these feature flags. And again, my experience with feature flagging comes from startups where you might lack QA teams and you won't have the bandwidth to also test all kind of scenarios. So the best thing is to just release it internally first, let the team use it and catch any bugs. give you a bit of time, like a week or something, before you actually release it for everyone. Right now, yeah, let's now quickly build out our feature 3 with a feature flag. So I'm gonna create something called feature 3.tsx. Again, the actual code is not important, so I'm just gonna quickly copy this here. It's the same card component and text component which maintain exports. We are just using that instead of MUIs. And back in our home page, I'm just gonna place my feature 3 here. Right, so now we have a new feature 3 here. And let us also place this feature 3 in the about page. Maybe we want to show it at multiple places. So I'm just gonna also put it in my about page. Import feature 3. All right, so we have it in our home page and our about page. So now the problem is this is now actually available for everyone, but no, assume this feature is quite more complicated. Things might break because the backend is still experimenting. There's one particular client who's still requesting it, irrespective of how much it is ready or something, whatever. And let's try to build out a flag that would immediately enable this flag for that client and not for anyone else. And we're going to do this based on the ID, right? Let's assume that user has an ID and we're going to use that ID to conditionally render this. Let us quickly set up a profile endpoint. By the way, I've set this up already for you. So if you go to handlers, you'll see that we have a MSW handler, which is going to send you a fake profile. So I've already set this up. I already have a course on how to do this and how we can use this to better develop or better simulate APIs. You can check that out. And yeah, let me quickly create a API folder, and it's gonna be profile.ts. I'm just gonna copy the code from here. So it's essentially nothing but a simple fetch profile endpoint, typecasting the data to profile type, and it's gonna fetch my data from localhost 9000 profile. Again, you might assume we didn't spin up a server for localhost 9000. Where is this coming from? This is handled by MSW. So you don't have to worry about it. It's gonna work. Just trust me here. I'm gonna quickly use React use effect to make a call to this endpoint. Again, you're not supposed to use something like this. My course covers this too. We use React query there. But for now, for this example, this is fine. So I'm gonna get some data here. And yeah. And this data would include my profile information. So I'm just gonna also use state. This would be initially null, but it's gonna have my profile type, or it's gonna be null. And we can simply call this profile, set profile. Great. And I can say set profile to data. And the data, if you hover, it's gonna be profile type because of the typecasting at data at fetch profile level. So this is cool. So now we have the profile information. And what do I mean by flagging it for that user? You might have already done something like this a lot, obviously, because it's as simple as putting a check equal to E45. I think this is the IDA for this particular user, and the profile data might not be available initially. Yeah, so this was it. So you see the feature is still enabled because my mock is returning the profile which has an ID of 12345. If I just make this 1234, the feature is hidden. Yeah, this is the feature flag. Yeah, and you can also play around with the mock here instead of right. It's gonna also cause a page refresh. But yeah, this works. And let us also do this in the about page. Again, I'm not worried about the best of the best code quality here. This duplication is fine. Ideally, you want to extract this into a reusable hook, something like use profile, and do it. But for the sake of this course, this is completely fine. All right, so now even the about page would have the feature. Great. Now let us clean up whatever we wrote here, right? We could separate this out into our individual features. So that would be function, just like our development flag. I'm just gonna call this useFeatureFlag. And what would it do? It would by default return false, but it takes a simple parameter, which is gonna be enable. I'm gonna call it enable condition to be explicit. And it is optional. If you don't pass anything, we just hide the feature. We don't care. and the enable condition should default to Boolean, like it should return a Boolean. So if enable condition is true, we also return true for the feature flag. So that means it's gonna look, the API is gonna look something like this. Const is feature 3 enabled is gonna be use feature flag, and the enable condition, yeah, AI is auto completing it. Yeah, it's gonna look something like this. Now instead of doing that conditional check through raw profile data, I could just simply do is feature 3 enabled. So this is great. Now what would the component version of it look like? Again, simply create a feature flag component. By default, it should return null. Right? We don't want to return anything if the feature flag doesn't match the condition. And just like our hook, this would also take enable condition, which would again be optional. Don't worry, we'll in the end refactor it to be a lot cleaner. These hooks the component would share the logic, and it can also take children. Again, I'm going to make that also optional. Great. So we can reuse the hook here. So const is feature enabled. If the feature is enabled, if the feature flag has the enable condition, and if that is true, we return children. And also if children is not passed, we can simply return null. So I'm just cleaning up extra things there. And now here we can simply wrap this in a feature flag. So yeah, that is the quickest way we have our feature flag. And let us also do this in our about page. We're not using a profile anymore because the enable condition should go here. All right, let's copy this. And in our about page, we're going to replace this with here. Of course, the feature flag component is now supposed to be, yeah, we can also now put this logic in a different file, just like a development flag. I'm just going to call useFeatureFlag.ts. Put this logic here. I'm going to export default. And also copy this, create a component. Export default. And this would use our hook. Okay. And let's import it here. And let me copy this for my about page too. Great. So things should work as expected. My about page and home page still have the component. Now again, you might notice that we are repeating some of the code in the home page and the about page, this particular logic. And you might assume that if the condition changes at one place, you should also be changing it the other place, or not ideal. But again, this is for this course, this is the simplest example I took. In real world scenarios, you could be in a situation where the feature 3 is only available at one place. So essentially you're not using it at multiple places. But if you are using it, it's most probably because it's a layout thing. And that means the condition should still be at the high level, because here you're using box, there you could be using something else. But yeah, for this example, this minimal reproduction of code, duplication of code is completely fine. But there is a problem. Right now, only the user with the ID 12345 can use this feature, not even your team. So if you want to enable for your team too, you would have to pass all the IDs here, and it doesn't look clean enough. The other way to do this is to use something called search params, right? So for example, let's assume your team comes and says, yeah, enable this feature 3 if I pass something like feature 3 equal to true in the params. So in that case, enable the feature for me, irrespective of what the ID is. So let's go update our feature flag for that. So we'll just go to our useFeatureFlag component. So it just takes enable condition right now. I am going to do something where I'm going to give this feature a name, and I'm going to use that as a search param. Again, this would be optional. It's going to be string. This type of implementation would depend on your routing library, but I'm using React Router, and we have something called search params here. So I can get that from use search params. It returns an array. So my first entry in the array would be the actual params. Now I can simply check if my feature is feature param enabled. I'm just going to call it feature param enabled. If there is a feature name, okay, because without feature name, I don't know what to look for. And if that feature name is set to true in the search params, that means the feature is enabled. Otherwise, it's not enabled, right? You could say false or undefined. That is fine. So again, AI gave me some stupid code here. I'm just gonna combine this logic here. But yeah, so now what I'm doing is I'm using search params. I'm checking if that particular name is set to true, essentially what we did here. And if it is set to true, show this component. So we updated the hook. So we should also be updating our component. So I'm gonna do that here. And we can simply pass the feature name here. And this component still, this logic won't change. The condition which evaluates to true, that would change. Great. Now, in order to quickly test it out, what I'm going to do is back in my mocks, I'm going to say that this is now only shown to 1, 2, 3, 4. Here, I'm going to give a feature name and I'm going to call it feature 3, but in a kebab case. And I'm also going to update this logic in my about page because you don't know where the user could land. So I'm just putting it at both the places. Great. So if I refresh, now this feature is gone because I'm not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anymore. I'm the user with 1, 2, 3, 4. But we have enabled feature flagging through search params. So my feature 3, if I set it to true now, should be visible now. So this is called enabling it through search param. And you can also use your URL to store a lot of state. So this works, but there is still one problem. Now, if I go to home page, my search param is lost and you can check the URL, it is lost. So I'll have to again do something like feature 3 equal to true to enable it. And if I again go to about page, that feature is again lost. Now this is a little painful if you ask me, but how do we persist this change? So this is going to be a little complicated. We'll have to use some kind of storage, and the one which we have in the browser is local storage or session storage. We also have IndexedDB, but yeah, for this particular thing, it's better we use session storage or local storage. So that is what we are going to do now. So back in my feature flag component, I'm going to do something which would enable us to persist these changes. So I'm going to bring in a storage type. I'm just going to quickly type it out, what kind of storage type it is. So it could be local or session. So I'm going to call it local storage or session storage. You could have done it here or here too, but I prefer this way of explicit undefined for this thing at least. Now, my persist2 API would support either of these storage types. And I can also make this undefined. In fact, actually, let me remove this undefined. It doesn't help much. I'm gonna extract my persist2. Now, how do I check this? I'm just going to first set the value to local storage or session storage. And how do we do that? We'll have to use useEffect because we are talking to something which is external to React. The browser API is external to React. So what I'm going to do here is, and this would depend on persist2, feature name, and if is feature param enabled, right? I'm just going to pull this up. All right. React refers to UMD. I have to import React. Now, if persist2 and feature name exist and the is feature param enabled is not set to undefined, I would set the window persist2. So essentially what I'm doing here is the window object has local storage or session storage, which I can access. And because I type my storage type to be storage type or session storage, TypeScript is smart enough to help me here. And I'm going to set the item, and you could name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name it something very specific, something like feature flag with some this kind of syntax. I'm just going to give the feature pass the feature name here, and also set the value as a string, and this value would be whatever the is feature param enabled is. So that would be true. And yeah, this would essentially set the feature flag and save the value to local storage or session storage. I'm just going to quickly show you that. So in my home, not sure what worked. This happens when you're working with external APIs with Vite. So just refresh and things should be fine. I'll go to my application. I'll go to my session storage. So right now this key value pair is empty. I'm just going to persist this too. I have to also pass the feature flag persist type, storage type to my actual feature flag 2, which is here. And for now, let me quickly copy the storage type persist 2, and I can pass the persist 2 here. So now I can persist to session storage. Autocomplete should help me here. I'm just gonna do this in the about page 2, which is around here. You can already see that the feature flag is being set to false here when nothing is passed. But if I now pass feature 3 is equal to true, so we can see that we can at least set the value to true. But if we don't set anything, it's going to set the value to false. So we still have some things to work on. We'll get there. But yeah, this is working for now. All right. So now let's add those edge case check where if the flag is already set, we don't want to reset it. We want to only reset it maybe when we set something very explicit. So I'm going to do that here. Some of this logic has to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for the stored value now. And this would only be checked when we have the persist2 and feature name. And both of this exist. That means that feature was meant to be persisted. I'm just going to get that value from persist2. And again, TypeScript would help me out here. I'm just gonna get my feature. So if there's no such value, that means the stored value is null. And we can check if the stored value is enabled. So I'm just gonna call it is stored enabled. And this is when stored value is equal to true. And true is a string version of it. Again, you can clean this up and do that, but I just want to show you the concept here quickly. Now I'm gonna, instead of directly checking the search params, I'm gonna extract the raw param. And again, I can get this from my feature name. So search params dot get feature name, or it's gonna be null. Now this is the raw param, and what I'm gonna check now, if my feature is feature param enabled, is raw param shouldn't be equal to null, and raw param should be equal to true. Otherwise, it's gonna be undefined. And finally, I can also check if my feature is stored enabled. Now this change will help us persist the change. All right, so now again, let me print the developer tools. I'm in session storage. So in the about, I'm just gonna add it to true. So the value is now set to true. Now let us try to navigate back to home page. Hopefully it works. Yep. The value is still set to true and my feature is persisting. Maybe it would be good to have a feature where I could set this to false. And yeah, that is also done here because now the value will be set to false. Go to about page, yeah. And again, set it back to true. You have your feature enabled and this will persist across sessions. And if you want to use it across local storage, use local storage or just use session storage. All right, now let me see what else I have to cover. I've covered the search params. I've covered the navigation part of things. And oh yeah. So now if you notice, we had a lot of similar logic with our hook and the component, and there was a lot of context switching whenever I was switching the file tab, and maybe we should just have both of these in a single file, and that's what we're going to do now. And maybe this is not a component anymore. This is more of a utility file, right? It's a utility component. It's a component, but a utility component. So I'm gonna quickly put it in a utils folder. Let me name it utils. I'm gonna call this FeatureFlag.tsx, and we can simply copy paste most of the logic. I'm just gonna bring my FeatureFlag logic. This would still be a default export, and I can get rid of this file, and I can bring most of the logic from this file, and I can get rid of this file. This won't be a default export anymore. And we have some repeating types, and we can also clean this useFeatureFlag, and yeah, things look great. UI is broken because we need to update the path imports. Now this comes from the utils folder, and the about page 2. Great. So we still have things working, but you still see one error, which is fast refresh only works when file exports components. Use a new file to share constants or functions between components. So this is one of the shortcomings of hot module replacement, HMR. The proper fix is to have them in different files, but that's what we want to avoid. So the other solution is to ignore this warning, meaning you will see that HMR not working properly. But once you have this file in your repo, it is very rare that someone is changing these FeatureFlag utility components. So in this case, you can disable this. I've also attached the issue regarding this. You can go check it out. You can find this in the docs. But yeah, we can simply disable this next line for React refresh only export components. Don't disable this at a global level. There is a very good reason why this is a ESLint rule. And yeah, I think I can also simplify some of the types. So I'm just going to call type FeatureFlag. I think most of the things which hook uses can be my base type. And my component could simply extend with children. .react node. Yeah. This way we are able to co-locate our logic and things are clean and at a single place. So I like this structure. And we could also do this with our development flags. So let's quickly do that. I'm just going to call it flag.tsx. Put this logic, put this logic. Only one of it is going to be default, the hook. And I can just put this message there too. Get rid of my import. And that is cool. Get rid of this file, get rid of this file. Again, things are breaking because we are using the development flag in our feature 1. And yep, things should work as expected. All right. So in the next section, I'm going to quickly add one more improvement to our flag and then talk about server-side flags quickly. Now, one thing which we did not add to our feature flag and which we are going to add now, a fallback, right? And this fallback is not added to the hook. It's going to be added to our feature flag component. Again, this would be an optional React node that we can pass to our flag. So what does this fallback do is it enables us to use the feature flag in a toggle kind of approach. So you could toggle between old and new feature. I'm going to quickly show you how the API is going to look. But here it's going to be simply be fallback. Otherwise it's going to be null. But yeah, going back to our nodes. So this fallback feature enables us to use the feature flag API this way, right? You could put a feature flag and put your old feature in the fallback. And within the child, you pass the new feature. So this way, after a week of testing or something, you can remove the flag directly. So the entire old code goes away in one go. And I would say it's a good option to have for your feature flagging component. It makes a good API. If you remember, I use two different naming conventions for my components. One where I'm using kebab case and one where I'm using Pascal case. The reason for this is quite simple. And the intention is when you're migrating something to a different version or using different components, you can use a different convention to name things. And it provides a very explicit boundary that, oh yeah, this is going to be a new component. And it also makes it easy when you're going to delete files related to the old feature. But again, some teams set up ESLint rules which enforce a strict convention. So maybe you would have to turn it off for a while or something like that. So talk it with your team and do it. But otherwise, I find that using a different convention when refactoring helps a lot. Now, so far everything we have done has been client side. The browser decides which features to show based on the URL params or the local conditions. But this is only good for internal testing and small rollouts. Once you start releasing to actual production users or your product is being used by a lot of people, moving to a server-side solution is the way to go. It provides consistent experience across devices. Your users are also testing on mobile, also testing on desktop. And this isn't tied to a single browser or session. And you can also do a lot more dynamic targeting this way. Instead of just user ID, you could also go with subscription type, geography, A/B testing groups. And if things go haywire, you can instantly toggle these features through backend instead of redeploying your front-end code again and again. And the flow for it would look something like this. The server stores the flag states. This could be in a database if you're implementing the solution yourself, or a config file, or you can use a third-party service like Launch Darkly, Unleash, or Flagsmith. Even Postdog has feature flagging services, so you can use either of them. They're quite good. The front end is basically request an endpoint where you get all the information regarding the flags, and you simply replace the enable condition which we already have with that whatever the flag evaluates to. So this way you don't have to worry about search params, you don't ever have to worry about local storage or session storage. All right. Now, great. Yeah. Even though I would love to go and do refactoring of all the files involved, my idea was to teach you about feature flagging. I've done that. So I would say you can go and play with the code base I provided. Try to put the new layouts behind a feature flag. Try to have programmatic flags using those hooks, and maybe try to just remove MUI5 from the code base. Again, it's a fairly simple code base, so this should be easy to do. But maybe at work, you want to use some of the feature flags I've shown you. And if you find this refactoring related content helpful, please let me know and give me suggestions. And yeah, I'll create more content like this. Thank you for watching. I'll see you around.